Now, about 10 years ago, there was a whole rash of movie releases that just put the entire premise of the film in the title. So there was Hotel for Dogs, Couples Retreat, We Bought a Zoo, Hot Tub Time Machine. Not particularly imaginative, but it did at least allow you to make an instant decision as to whether you might want to see the film. As elevator pitches for horror movies go, Dracula AD 1972 is pretty hard to beat. It's Dracula, he's in 1972. If that doesn't hook you, you're probably not going to be hooked.
The film begins as many of its Hammer forebears ended, with Van Helsing chasing Dracula through a gloomy Victorian landscape.
Watch how elegantly the title sequence sets up the transition from the Victorian past to the contemporary 1970s setting. That one sudden tilt from the graveside to the sky, from the Victorian era to the groovy 1970s, complete with funky guitar licks, is one of my favourite moments in Hammer horror. It's probably as close as the film gets to making good on its premise, but the film is still a thoroughly entertaining watch. In Dracula AD 1972, well-to-do it girl Stephanie Beacham falls in with the wrong crowd, which ultimately results in the unleashing of an ancient evil. Dracula AD 1972 was poorly received at the time and is generally considered something of a failure. But I think the most interesting things about the film are precisely its failings and its flaws. This was meant to be the reboot that launched the Dracula franchise into the late 20th century. In fact, it plays out like more of a lament for a lost era. Dracula and Van Helsing are both thoroughly out of place in the modern world, which has left their rigid sense of good and evil behind. And they're not the only fish out of water. By 1972, the summer of love had long since wilted, and the film's thrill-happy hippie holdouts seem lost and adrift. In this early scene, Johnny Alucard and his gang of hippie hedonists gatecrash an upper-crust party. The scene is largely played for laughs, but there's a real hint of underlying menace to it, and maybe even an echo of the relatively recent Manson murders. There's something queasy and offbeat about the whole film, which makes for a compelling watch. Christopher Lee is largely a silent, latent presence throughout the film, and leaves most of the heavy blouse wearing to his modern-day disciple. And yes, you'll figure it out as soon as you hear his name, even if Van Helsing doesn't. Van Helsing is of course played by Peter Cushing, as magnetically watchable as ever. He alternates between tender concern for his granddaughter, played by Stephanie Beacham, and a frantic lust for familial revenge on Dracula, the scourge of his ancestors. In fact, Van Helsing and Dracula both labour under family curses in this film, as Van Helsing's parents chose to burden him with the first name Lorimer. The film moves fast in no particular direction, but what appeals to me is its curious in-between atmosphere. It's self-aware, but it's not self-parody, and it never descends into outright camp. It's contemporary, but it's not hip. In fact, the London of Dracula AD 1972 has more in common with Steptoe & Son than Mary Quant and David Bailey. Watch out for Michael Coles, who plays the lesser-spotted, non-skeptical movie copper, jaded by the nihilism of the early 70s and ready to believe just about anything. The early 1970s was a great period for horror films. Dracula AD 1972 isn't quite one of the best of the period, but it is still thoroughly entertaining. It's unique, it's atmospheric, and like a lot of horror films, it captures the spirit of its age, albeit not quite in the way the filmmakers intended. Even if you're like me and vampire films can leave you a little bit cold, Dracula AD 1972 won't disappoint you. So if you like your scares with flares, check it out and enjoy Dracula AD 1972.
Dig the music, kids.